asking me what's going on in Malaysia, because apparently there's anti-government protests in Malaysia, and they were saying they looked like they were copied and pasted from Hong Kong or from Thailand. And sure enough, if you look, that is exactly what's going on. If you go to Twitter for just 1 minute, they're all using the Twitter official Milk Tea Alliance hashtag. This is a U.S. social media giant promoting this pan-Asian uprising, the Asian version of the U.S. engineered Arab Spring from 2011. And if you look at all of the groups before, Thailand, in Myanmar, in Hong Kong, they were all backed by the U.S. government openly. The U.S. government is funding the core organizations driving these protests. And sure enough, that is exactly what's going on in Malaysia. So what happened in Malaysia was there is this opposition leader, Anwar Ibrahim. He is meant to head the U.S. client regime of choice in Malaysia. And what happened was there was an election, and there was kind of like a power-sharing accommodation made not that long, like a couple of years ago, and there was kind of a stalemate, a political stalemate, and that government fell apart, and now there's this rush between Malaysia's old guard and this US-backed faction led by Anwar Ibrahim. And in case you don't believe me, I mean, I've been writing about Malaysia for many years. This was one of the more recent articles. This is from 2018, when I was still using the Tony Carnelucci pen name. Washington Post covers up U.S. meddling in Malaysia. While Washington wasn't looking, this is the Washington Post, while Washington wasn't looking, democracy won a major battle over authoritarianism in Malaysia, a Muslim-majority nation that just voted out its crooked, illiberal leader and has embarked on a peaceful transition to a new era of hope. The unexpected change has given the Trump administration a chance to reverse a policy of benign neglect toward the region, support democracy, and gain a rare win over China. The United States had little to do with last month's overwhelming election victory by a multiracial, multi-party opposition coalition in Malaysia. The Washington Post just completely and deliberately lies. The U.S. National Endowment for Democracy funds the opposition in Malaysia up one side, down the other. And we have Daniel Twinning here. This was a tweet that he put out. IRI Global, this is the International Republican Institute. It is a subsidiary of the National Endowment for Democracy, has worked to strengthen Malaysian opposition parties since 2002. This is him admitting this. For the first time since 1957, they won and are empowered. Democrats around the world can play a long game, confident that sooner or later. This is Daniel Twinning admitting that the U.S. government was behind the opposition coming to power in Malaysia, and the whole purpose was what? Was to stop China, of course. So let's just listen to Daniel admit it himself.
IRI, we had worked in Malaysia with opposition political parties since 2002. And guess whose funding we did it with? The National Endowment for Democracy. So for 15 years, working with NED resources, we worked to strengthen Malaysian opposition parties. And guess what happened 2 months ago? After 61 years, they won. I visited, and I was sitting there with many of the leaders, the new leaders of this government, many of whom were just our partners we had been working with for 15 years. And one of the most senior of them, who's now one of the people running the government, said to me, gosh, IRI, you never gave up on us even when we were ready to give up on ourselves, right? And we're sitting in the Prime Minister's office. Here we are. Guess what the first step, really one of the first steps the new government took? It froze Chinese infrastructure investments. This is not a hugely pro-American country. It's probably never going to be an actual U.S. ally. But this is going to redound to our benefit, right? And that's an example of the long game.
So that's Daniel, and he just completely comes out and admits it. The U.S. carried out regime change in Malaysia. They were interfering in the internal political affairs and in the elections of Malaysia, just like they accused Russia of doing without evidence. This is them openly admitting they were doing it in Malaysia, and they do it all over the world and all over Southeast Asia, and for the exact same reason too. And I also want to point out these other organizations. You're going to see them if these protests start to get out of hand. You're going to hear these organizations in the news all the time. Lawyers for Liberty, Malaysia Kini, okay, and there was this street movement, Bersih, and they were all wearing yellow shirts in Malaysia. These are all U.S. government-funded fronts. The gall of Malaysia Kini, if you go to their website, to to have a subscription where you have to pay money to read their propaganda when they are fully funded by the US government. It's outrageous. These people have no shame. I guess if you're selling your country out to the United States, where would you draw the line? Keep all of this in mind. If the protests start getting out of hand, I will start to get into the situation in Malaysia extensively. But I just want to point this out, that this is just another copy and pasted US regime change operation in Southeast Asia. I have been warning people for months, if not over a year now, that the US is trying to instigate a Asia Arab Spring style uprising, and this is all about encircling China with failed, divided, destroyed states. So we already see Myanmar burning to the ground. We see the protesters here in Thailand trying their hardest to do so here. Now we have the beginnings of protests in Malaysia. And luckily,